So lots of people have asked me how I created this scene in Blender. And I'm going to show you now. I'm just going to walk you through the whole process on how I set everything up, how I do the shaders and the lighting and everything. So let's start. I'm here in Blender now. And this is my basic scene. And the first thing that I usually do when I create a scene like that is I create a camera. And the reason why I do that, let me just go into the camera by pressing 0 on the numpad, is once you've got the camera set up, then you can set everything inside the scene up, because you don't want to model things and create things that is not going to be in the camera view. So obviously, it might sound obvious, but you want everything to be seen from the camera's perspective. So for the camera, for this guy, it's just basically, if I go down here to the camera, it's got a very wide lens of 27 millimeters. It's typical for these type of scenes to have a wide angle. And so I basically set up the camera. And then also what I did is I enabled the golden ratio. You can see here these lines here. And then let me just play it a bit. And you can see this bridge here intersects with the golden ratio line. So that just makes your composition nice. So you can set the golden ratio lines up if you go to viewport display and on your camera, and then go to composition guides, and then just you can see you can put it on and off. It's a bit it's not as bright or as apparent as in some. I found it software like Cinema 4D, it looks a bit nicer, but you can still get the idea here. So that's the step one, is to set up your camera and then set up your grid, your composition grid. Then what I did is then I just modeled these buildings. Most of these buildings, they're very easy to model. It's just basic subdivision modeling and Boolean modeling in, all those type of things. Nothing really fancy or advanced. The most advanced thing is probably this car, which I modeled actually in Cinema 4D when I was still using that. But I'm sure I can easily and faster do it in Blender. Blender is an amazing modeling tool. And here's a train I modeled in Blender. Just press Q and then for quick favorites and enable wireframe, and then you can just maybe see all the things I've got modeled here. So it's nothing hectic. It's all simple. The modeling is not too hectic. Then let me just show you something cool with the camera. I'm just going to put this wireframe off. So if you look at the camera, you can see the camera moves. If I go into camera view, you can see it's got this sort of a tilt. And I set this up. I'm just going to go press numpad 7, go to top view. And you can see what's happening here. You can see the camera. It's actually pivoting. There's a empty that I set up here. So the camera is rotating from a pivot point. It's parented to an empty. So it's actually the empty that's rotating. And then the camera rotates with the empty. And it just gives it that nice movement. So it's almost like the camera is on some sort of a rail or something like that. So I usually use parent cameras to empties to get this type of effect. So that is basically everything about the composition and the camera. Let me go into 0 again. Then another thing that's very important is you have to think about your composition. You have to split it up in 3. You've got your foreground elements. That's very important. Then you've got that's all these buildings here. Then you've got your midground elements, and then you've got your background elements, which is these buildings. Yeah, so it's always good to split up your composition. And if you have a look here, there was something bothering me about this. I was relatively happy. I'm never 100% happy with anything I do, but I suppose that's the curse of being an artist. So basically what bothered me is that these buildings, they were too stark. And then what I did is I created this fog plane, and you can see immediately if I put it on, off, immediately it just pops. And I think that's sort of the holy grail I was looking for in this piece. So if I just go here and select this, you can see it's just a big plane. And once I put that on, you can immediately see that this is the foreground, this is the midground, and that's the background. So it just pops like that. So I'll explain all the materials to you now in the next section of this video. So I just wanted to tell you how I created everything. And then just the last thing, as the camera moves, the train comes. So that's also deliberate. Your eye needs something to focus on. So there's an animation of the train. And once that's done, we're gonna come to the other side, and then the car's gonna come in. And then your eye focuses on the car. And I really like how the car sort of comes through the mist here. Okay, let's look at the interesting part. I think the part that everybody's waiting for, the materials, because this is it's very strictly NPR scene. NPR stands for non-photorealistic rendering. And this is an area where Blender really shines. I've used a lot of 3D programs, and in the past I've used Cinema 4D, and I used I think it's called the Toon shader system. And I have to tell you that it's nothing on what you can do in Blender. That's one of the main reasons why I went over to Blender. It's very, very powerful for non-photorealistic rendering, and especially if you incorporate grease pencil. So basically what I did is, let's just have a look at one of these materials. Just tab into this node group here. Okay, I've just tabbed into this. I've just selected this one here. So it's just a basic. It starts with a basic toon setup. It looks scary, but it's really not that scary. So you just basically start with your diffuse BSTF shader, and then the shader to RGB, and then your color ramp. That's your basic. That's how everybody does basic toon shaders. And then I just added some noise texture and Voronoi noise texture, and then just using color with color, you just combine them and just I just use the screen here and then a multiply. So you just basically layer them. If I click on this one might be this is this is a very simple one, this pipe here. So this is a straight diffuse BSDF shaded to RGB with a color ramp, and that's just a very basic one. And then these ones are more, I just press tab to go into it. So they're a bit more complicated, nothing too hectic. It's just basically, like I said, you layer them on top of each other. You've got your basic toon shader, and then you just add a bit of noise. This one here is quite interesting. I'm just going to press / to solo it. You can see it's this bridge with these bricks. So all I did here is I just created same thing, a basic toon shader. And then I just added a brick texture, and I used the color ramp there with constant, and then I just multiplied them with a color node here, and nothing too hectic. And then I also used the inverse hole method for most things. If you're not familiar with the inverse hole method, you can just Google it or YouTube it. There's lots of tutorials available on how to do that. So basically all that does is you create another material, and then you add a solidify modifier to your object, and you assign that new material to that, and that new material is basically just an emission shader, and that creates an outline. As you can see here, everything's got a sort of a outline. And then for the buildings in the back, to get this nice rim light, I did exactly the same, but instead of using a dark material for the outlines, I just used a light one. You'll see this one called highlight here. So that's basically how I set up most of the materials. There's nothing too fancy here. And okay, let's look at the backdrop. So the backdrop here is basically just an image, and I just gave it a bit of a curve just to simulate the atmosphere, because obviously the earth is round unless you believe in a flat earth. Maybe I should make a version for flat earth believers as well, but anyway, that's besides the point. So all I did here is I just used an image. I generated this image with DALL-E, I think. So I'm starting to incorporate a bit of AI into my work. And as you can see, it actually, if you use AI like this, it's actually nice, because it would take me hours to draw this, and I don't want to do that. I want to focus on the scene. So this is actually an instance where AI is quite useful. So it's basically easy. Just use a image texture and pump that into an emission, and use a mix shader here, and then have another emission that's sort of driving with a color. So you can actually, if I do this, you can see it if I play with the factor. If I bring it up, it's going to have more of this color, and if I bring it down, it's going to have more of the texture. So you can make your clouds a bit to dial down or dial in how you want your clouds to stand up or fade into the mix, so to speak. Okay, and then now what else can I talk about here? Okay, and then a lot of these, like the car, I think I used grease pencil on the car. So you just use the line art object, so it creates a new, like if you go Shift A, let me just do it quickly, and you go to grease pencil and you create a collection line art, and then you just select this collection, and then you can create a grease pencil object for everything here. And then there's a lot of grease pencil detail here. If you look on the curb here, all of these I did with grease pencil, all these little puddles and thingies like that. That's all. I just sort of just drew them on afterwards in grease pencil. It's a lot of fun. You can draw directly on top of your geometry, and you've got quite a lot of control. There's a lot of instances like this. This I did in grease pencil, that little funny thing, this Chinese writing, I don't know what it says or if it's even real, but it's just sort of Chinese writing, because I wanted to get that sort of original Blade Runner look. I did all of this in grease pencil. And then this here is just an animated texture. So this is something, you can see it in the final one. It's just an animated texture of a billboard that I'm also using with an emission. And then these guys here, it's just basically graffiti. I almost said tattoos, but graffiti is basically tattoos for buildings. Yeah, that's a funny thing to say. Anyway, so basically with these guys is I just used an image texture, and then with a mix shader and a transparent BSDF, so they have a transparent background. So all of these guys here. So it's just basically, if you look here, you can see there's the image texture, and the alpha goes into the factor, and then there's a transparent. It goes into into the mix shader, and then that's just basically how you set that up. Nothing too complicated. And then for the lights, I've got this main big light here, and then I also use the environment a bit. Let me just go here to the environment, and it's just using this sort of pinkish color here. And then, yes, like I said, this main light here, I'm just going to the camera view. This main light, let me find my lights. So this main light just basically lights the scene, and then I've got all these street lights, just sort of ambient lights, and then there's lights that's on the car. If I play it here, you can see there's a light under the car here. There's a rim light on top of the train. So I try to get the lights just to be part of the environment, except for this big one here, which is just sort of a casting light over the whole scene. And then all the other ones are just point lights here. This is an area light, and these are just point lights that, oh, no, they're actually area lights as well. But it doesn't matter. You can use point or area lights for those. And that's basically how I set up the lights. And yes, I think in a nutshell, that's basically how I created this scene. This is not a tutorial. It's more like a behind the scenes video of how I created the scene. If I had to do a tutorial, it would actually be a whole course, a huge course, a massive course. But I might actually do that in the future if people are interested in something like that. Just let me know in the comments. And yes, I hope you enjoyed this video. Okay, just the last thing, I'll show you now what I did with the post-production. Because you can totally do your post-production in Blender, and I often do it, but I like to do my post-production in After Effects. So all I do is I basically bring this in as a PNG sequence, and always if you do that, just the first thing, just right click and just go to interpret footage and make sure that it's set to your frame rate, which is 24. That's very important to do that. And then I just create an adjustment layer, and if I put it on, you can see it immediately pops nicely. And all I did here is I just added a curves. So I just go to effects, and with the curves, all you want to do basically, it's just a quick and dirty trick. It's just basically add a little S here. So you bring this down here, just add a little node and bring this down slightly, and then up here you bring it up here. So it creates this little S. That's just a quick and dirty trick I use most of the times. You can do the same thing you can use those curves in Blender as well. And then there's a vignette. I've always used the vignettes in After Effects. Blender, the vignettes, they're a bit there's a lot of extra steps to set them up, and then with this vignette is basically, I think I just use the standard vignette here, and it's very easy and very quick and dirty to set up a vignette and inside of After Effects. And then you can also maybe add a noise here if you want to as well. And that's basically how I did it. So let me just show you here. This is the one without the mist path that I put in here. And if I take it off, this is the final one. So yeah, it would just be interesting to me to think which one you prefer. So if you can in the comments tell me, do you prefer this one with the dark buildings? I mean, they've all got their own aesthetic appeal, or this one, yeah, this is the final one, which I think looks much better. And then yeah, you can also see that animated VR thingy that I did there as an animated texture in Blender, and this is basically it. So Blender is super powerful for NPR stuff. Like I said earlier, I went over from Cinema 4D to Blender exactly for this reason and for modeling. So in my opinion, there's not a better software package on the market for modeling and for creating non-photorealistic stuff than Blender. It's the most powerful software package for those two things that's currently out there on the market. But we can't actually say that's on the market, because the market implies that you have to pay something, and it's 100% free. So yes, Blender never ceases to amaze me.